You know what's hilarious about this whole situation? Captain Alexis Thompson lazily spun her coffee mug on the conference table, watching the lukewarm liquid create a miniature whirlpool. We spent centuries wondering if we were alone in the universe, dreaming up all these scenarios about first contact, and when we finally meet aliens, they turn out to be the galactic equivalent of that neighbor. Her XO, Marcus Reynolds, raised an eyebrow. You mean the one who keeps reporting you to the HOA because your grass is a quarter-inch too tall? Exactly. She pointed her mug at him. Except instead of passive-aggressive notes about lawn maintenance, we're getting condescending lectures about how we're doing space wrong. The rest of the command staff gathered around the table shared knowing looks. They'd all been there for the past 3 years of humanity's integration into the Galactic Confederation, watching with mounting frustration as every single human innovation or suggestion was met with the same patronizing response from the older species. Lieutenant Commander Olivia Drake, their chief engineer, cleared her throat. Speaking of doing space wrong, you'll never guess what the Xaxrith ambassador told me yesterday. Apparently, our FTL drive designs are, and I quote, charmingly primitive, but concerning in their lack of aesthetic consideration. What the hell does that even mean? Thompson asked. From what I gathered, they think our engines are too efficient. Drake's voice dripped with sarcasm. Apparently, we're supposed to use their standardized designs that take twice as long to reach the same destination, but look prettier doing it. Because that makes perfect sense, Reynolds muttered. Oh, it gets better, Drake continued. When I tried to explain how our designs reduce fuel consumption by 40%, they actually patted me on the head. Physically patted me on the head with their weird tentacle thing and said, "Sweet child species, you'll understand when you're older." Thompson's coffee mug hit the table with a sharp crack. They did what now? Yeah, and that's not even the worst part. The Confederation Council is voting tomorrow on whether to mandate their standardized designs across all member species. Which means they're trying to force us to abandon our own technology in favor of their inferior versions. Thompson finished, her voice deadly quiet. Again. The room fell silent as everyone processed this latest development. It wasn't the first time the older species had tried to force humanity to conform to their way of doing things, but it was perhaps the most egregious example yet. Remember last month? Lieutenant James Cooper from Communications spoke up. When they tried to tell us we were approaching diplomacy incorrectly, because we actually try to resolve conflicts instead of spending 50 years exchanging passive-aggressive formal complaints? Or how about when they said our medical techniques were unnecessarily efficient, because we focus on treating the actual problem instead of achieving spiritual harmony with the illness? Dr. Rin Nakamura, their chief medical officer, added with a roll of her eyes. Don't forget the time they called our ship designs brutally utilitarian because we put the bridge somewhere protected instead of in a giant glass bubble on top. Reynolds chimed in. Thompson rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. You know what the real problem is? We've been too patient, too willing to play nice and respect their experience. And what has it gotten us? Nothing but condescension and attempts to force us backward instead of forward. She stood up, starting to pace around the conference room. We came into this alliance ready to learn, ready to share, ready to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And instead of finding partners, we found a bunch of species so set in their ways that they'd rather hobble progress than admit that maybe, just maybe, the new kids might have some good ideas. What are you suggesting, Captain? Reynolds asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time we stopped being so damn diplomatic about everything. They want to force us to use inferior technology? Fine. Let's show them exactly why that's a bad idea. Drake's eyes lit up. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking? Oh yes. Thompson's smile was not entirely pleasant. If they want to mandate their standardized designs, then we'll comply. To the letter. And then we'll show them exactly what happens when you try to force humanity to do things the slow way. The next day, as the Confederation Council gathered to vote on the standardization measure, humanity's representatives sat quietly, making no objections. This should have been the first warning sign. The measure passed, of course. The older species were quite pleased with themselves, satisfied that they'd finally brought the upstart humans in line with proper galactic tradition. The Xaxrith ambassador even made a patronizing speech about how this would help humanity grow into a more mature species. 1 week later, the first complaints started rolling in. It began with the shipping lanes. Human vessels, now equipped with the mandatory standardized drives, were indeed taking twice as long to make their usual runs. This meant that all the goods and services that the rest of the Confederation had come to rely on. Because despite their primitive methods, Humans had quickly become one of the most efficient trading species, were now delayed. But that was just the beginning. Fascinating, Thompson remarked, reading the latest reports in her ready room. It seems that several major trade hubs are experiencing significant shortages because our cargo ships are running behind schedule. Who could have possibly predicted this? Reynolds, sitting across from her, tried and failed to suppress his grin. Almost as fascinating as the fact that every single human vessel is now filing detailed maintenance reports for every minor fluctuation in their new standardized drives. By my last count, we've submitted over 50,000 individual reports in the past 3 days. Well, we have to be thorough, Thompson replied innocently. After all, we wouldn't want to risk operating these sophisticated systems incorrectly. Better safe than sorry, right? The reports were, of course, all perfectly legitimate and followed Confederation guidelines to the letter. The fact that those guidelines required each report to be reviewed and responded to by at least 3 different bureaucratic offices was hardly humanity's fault. By the end of the second week, the Confederation's administrative systems were thoroughly clogged. The older species, who prided themselves on their methodical approach to documentation, found themselves drowning in a sea of perfectly formatted, precisely detailed human paperwork. But the humans weren't done yet. "Captain," Drake called over the comm one morning, her voice suspiciously cheerful. "You might want to come down to engineering. We're conducting our mandatory aesthetic alignment procedures, as per Section 7.3 of the Standardization Protocols." Thompson arrived to find her engineering crew carefully applying ornate decorative patterns to every surface of the engine room, complete with flowing scripts in 17 different alien languages. The regulations do specify that all engineering spaces must maintain proper aesthetic harmony, Drake explained, carefully painting an elaborate spiral pattern around a power conduit. And since they didn't specify exactly what patterns were required, we thought we'd be inclusive and incorporate elements from all member species. The fact that the patterns were giving several visiting alien engineers severe headaches from trying to follow all the clashing artistic styles was, naturally, completely unintentional. By the end of the third week, the Confederation was in chaos. Trade routes were backed up, administrative systems were collapsing under the weight of human compliance, and every single human vessel had become a floating art installation that somehow managed to offend the artistic sensibilities of every species simultaneously, while remaining technically within regulatory requirements. That's when humanity deployed their secret weapon. They started offering to help fix the problems they'd created. "Oh, you need those medical supplies delivered faster?" human captains would ask innocently. "Well, we'd love to help, but unfortunately we're restricted to using the standardized drives. Such a shame we can't use our more efficient designs. The documentation system is overwhelmed? We have some fantastic automated processing systems that could clear that backlog in hours. But of course, those would be considered brutally utilitarian. Guess we'll just have to keep manually filing everything." The breaking point came exactly 1 month after the standardization measure passed. The Confederation Council called an emergency session as economic projections showed that if the current situation continued, at least 30% of member worlds would face significant resource shortages within the next quarter. Thompson and her fellow captains watched the proceedings with poorly concealed amusement as the older species faced a difficult realization. They needed humanity's primitive efficiency a lot more than humanity needed their sophisticated traditions. The standardization measure was repealed in record time, which, for the Confederation, meant only 3 days of debate instead of the usual 50 years. But humanity wasn't quite finished making their point. "We've been thinking," Thompson announced to the Council, standing at the podium with an expression of pure innocence. "After careful consideration of Confederation traditions, we believe it would be proper to spend the next several decades exchanging formal complaints about the attempted suppression of our technological development. We've prepared the first batch of 10 million documents for your review." The look of horror on the Council members' faces was priceless. In the end, a new agreement was reached. The older species would stop trying to force their methods on humanity, and humanity would agree not to weaponize malicious compliance again. They would also kindly remove the eye-searing decorative patterns from their engine rooms, though several crews asked to keep certain elements because they'd grown attached to them. As Thompson sat in her ready room later that evening, sipping actually hot coffee for the first time in weeks, she reflected on the lessons learned. The older species had learned that wisdom didn't always come with age, and that progress couldn't be stopped by tradition. Humanity had learned that sometimes the best way to make a point was to give people exactly what they asked for, good and hard. And everyone had learned that while humanity's patience was impressive, their creativity when it finally ran out was truly something to behold. You know what the best part is? She mused to Reynolds. They're so focused on following proper procedures that they can't even complain about what we did. We followed every single regulation perfectly. Almost makes you feel bad for them, Reynolds replied, then paused. Almost, Thompson smiled. Let's just hope they learned their lesson, because if they try something like this again... She let the threat hang in the air. God help them if they make us get creative again? Exactly. She raised her coffee mug in a toast. To humanity, doing space wrong in all the right ways. To humanity, Reynolds agreed, clinking his mug against hers. May the galaxy never recover from our efficiency. Somewhere in the vast bureaucratic machinery of the Confederation, the last of the human maintenance reports was finally being processed. It contained a single line, written in flowing script in 17 different languages. Aesthetic harmony achieved through maximum chaos. Maintenance complete. 3 months after what became known as the compliance crisis, or as some humans called it, the Great Malicious Compliance, Captain Thompson found herself back in the Confederation Council chambers. This time, however, the atmosphere was markedly different. I must admit, High Counselor Zixtral of the Zaxrith began, their tentacles writhing in what Thompson had learned to recognize as discomfort, that we may have been somewhat hasty in our previous assessments of human methodologies. Really? Thompson kept her face carefully neutral, though she couldn't quite hide the twinkle in her eyes. How fascinating. Please do elaborate. The High Counselor's skin shifted through several shades of embarrassed purple. Our analysis of the recent difficulties has revealed some unexpected efficiencies in human approaches to various challenges. You don't say. Indeed. Another counselor, this one a crystalline being from the Arxian Collective, chimed in. Their facets sparkled with what might have been amusement. We have been particularly impressed by your species' ability to... What was the phrase? Think outside the box? Though, perhaps, a third counselor added dryly, we could have done with slightly less thinking outside the box when it came to your interpretation of aesthetic harmony regulations. Thompson smiled sweetly. We simply wanted to ensure we respected all cultural artistic traditions equally. The maintenance crew is still having nightmares about those patterns, the counselor muttered. But, Zixtral interrupted, clearly trying to steer the conversation back on track. This brings us to the purpose of today's meeting. The Confederation Council has a proposal for humanity. Thompson raised an eyebrow. Oh? We would like to establish a new division within the Confederation, one focused on alternative approaches to traditional problems. Alternative approaches? Thompson repeated, fighting to keep the grin off her face. Yes, we believe there may be some value in examining different methodologies, even ones that might seem, at first glance, to be... The High Counselor's tentacles twisted themselves into knots as they searched for the right word. Primitive? Brutally utilitarian? Charmingly concerning in their lack of aesthetic consideration? Thompson supplied helpfully. Several counselors winced. Innovative, Zixtral finished firmly, and we would like humanity to lead this initiative. Thompson leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You want us to officially head up a program that essentially legitimizes our way of doing things? Within reasonable parameters, the crystalline counselor added quickly. Of course. Thompson nodded sagely. We wouldn't want to be too efficient. That might be shocking. Captain, Zixtral said, and for the first time there was something like respect in their tone. I believe we have all learned that shocking is perhaps humanity's natural state of being. We would prefer to channel that tendency in more constructive directions, as opposed to, say, filing 10 million complaints in 17 languages. Precisely. Thompson pretended to consider this for a moment, though she'd already made up her mind. This was exactly the kind of opportunity humanity had been hoping for, a chance to actually influence Confederation policy instead of just being forced to follow it. Well, she said finally, I suppose we could be persuaded to help, on one condition? The counselors tensed visibly. Yes? We get to name the division. There was a collective sigh of relief around the chamber. That seems reasonable, Zixtral agreed. What did you have in mind? Thompson's smile widened. I was thinking we could call it the Department of Alternative Methodologies and Non-Standard Approaches to Learning and Innovation in Achieving Necessary Compliance and Efficiency. There was a moment of confusion as the counselors processed this. followed by a wave of groans as they realized what the acronym spelled out. DAMNALIANC? The crystalline counselor asked incredulously. We thought it had a nice ring to it, Thompson replied innocently. Unless, of course, you'd prefer we submit the standard 47 forms required for alternative name proposals. I believe the waiting period for those is currently 73 years? DAMNALIANCE is fine, Zixtrel said quickly, though I suspect we're going to regret this decision almost immediately. Probably, Thompson agreed cheerfully, but at least it'll be efficient regret. And so, the Department of Alternative Methodologies and Non-Standard Approaches to Learning and Innovation in Achieving Necessary Compliance and Efficiency was born. Within its first year, it managed to reduce Confederation bureaucratic processing times by 80%, modernize the entire interstellar shipping network, and cause no fewer than 12 different species to develop entirely new forms of headaches. It also, much to everyone's horror, started a trend of increasingly elaborate acronyms for new Confederation departments. But that's another story entirely. Back on her ship, Thompson added a small plaque to her office wall. It contained a single line, written in flowing script in 17 different languages. Efficiency through chaos, progress through compliance, and innovation through pure, unrestrained humanity. Below it, in slightly smaller text, just try to stop us. We dare you. 6 months into the existence of DAMNILEANCE, Captain Thompson was beginning to wonder if they'd created a monster. A highly efficient, wonderfully chaotic monster, but a monster nonetheless. You're not going to believe what just happened, Reynolds announced, bursting into her ready room with a grin that suggested either brilliant success or imminent disaster. With DAMNILEANCE involved, it was usually both. Try me, Thompson replied, not looking up from her terminal where she was reviewing the latest batch of innovative suggestions from human crews across the Confederation. The Arxians have submitted a proposal to DAMNILEANCE. They want to revolutionize their crystal-based computing systems using, and I quote, brutally utilitarian human optimization principles. Thompson's head snapped up. The Arxians, the same ones who spent 3 centuries arguing about whether adding a second processing core to their computers would disrupt their crystal's spiritual harmony? The very same. Reynolds dropped into the chair across from her, practically vibrating with glee. Apparently, after seeing how our primitive methods improve their administrative systems, they've decided that maybe spiritual harmony isn't all it's cracked up to be. Well, now I've seen everything. Thompson leaned back in her chair, shaking her head in amazement. What's next? The Zaxrith asking for help streamlining their traditional 17-step greeting ceremony? Reynolds' grin widened. Funny you should mention that. No. Yes. He pulled up a document on his tablet. They've officially requested assistance in developing what they're calling expedited diplomatic protocols. Apparently, spending 6 hours exchanging formal greetings before every meeting is becoming somewhat inconvenient now that they're trying to keep up with human efficiency. Thompson burst out laughing. Please tell me someone recorded the moment they submitted that request. I want it framed. Better than that, Reynolds replied. Dr. Nakamura's team has been documenting the physiological changes in various species as they adapt to human-style efficiency. She's calling it evolution through exasperation, a study in cross-species adaptation to human chaos theory. That's not a real scientific term. It is now. The Confederation Science Council approved it last week, along with tactical malicious compliance as a recognized diplomatic strategy. Thompson buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with laughter. We've corrupted them. We've actually corrupted them. Oh, it gets better, Reynolds continued, clearly enjoying himself. Remember how the Yeeth always insisted that their method of calculating FTL trajectories using interpretive dance was the only proper way? Don't tell me. They've requested dance lessons. Specifically, they want to learn human breakdancing. Apparently, they think it might lead to more dynamic calculated outcomes. Thompson tried to imagine the serpentine Yith attempting to breakdance. The mental image was both horrifying and hilarious. Please tell me we're documenting all of this. Lieutenant Commander Drake has been keeping a log. She's calling it How to Train Your Elder Species, a Human's Guide to Galactic Evolution Through Strategic Chaos. Of course she is. Thompson shook her head, still chuckling. You know, when we started this department, I thought we'd just be streamlining some bureaucratic processes. Maybe upgrading some outdated systems. I didn't expect to trigger a full-scale cultural revolution. To be fair, Reynolds pointed out, none of us expected the older species to embrace chaos quite so enthusiastically. He had a point. Once the initial shock had worn off, many of the elder species had approached human-style innovation with the zeal of converts. It turned out that after thousands of years of doing things the proper way, quite a few of them had been secretly longing for a little chaos. The real surprise had come when they started combining their ancient knowledge with human efficiency. The results were interesting. "Have you seen the latest Zaxrith human hybrid ship designs?" Reynolds asked, as if reading her thoughts. "They've managed to maintain their aesthetic requirements while incorporating our efficiency principles. The end result looks like something out of a fever dream, but it's twice as fast as anything else in the fleet. And the crew quarters actually have proper bathrooms instead of meditation chambers for bodily harmony," Thompson added. That particular traditional design feature had not been missed. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message notification. Thompson pulled it up and promptly choked on her coffee. "What is it?" Reynolds asked, concerned. "The Confederation Council is requesting—" She had to stop and double-check that she was reading it correctly. "They're requesting that we establish a sub-department specifically focused on innovative nomenclature generation. They want us to help them come up with more ridiculous acronyms? Apparently they've developed a taste for it. The Arxians have already submitted a proposal for their new research division, Bureau of Radically Innovative Lateral Learning and Interconnected Advanced Neural Technologies." Reynolds took a moment to work that one out. "BRILLIANT? "They're learning," Thompson said proudly. "They're actually learning. Should we be worried?" "Probably," she grinned, "but at least it'll be entertaining." Later that day, Thompson added another small plaque beneath the first one in her office. This one read, "First they mock you, then they fight you, then they join you, then they start making acronyms even worse than yours." And below that, in even smaller text, "Humanity's greatest victory, teaching the galaxy to embrace the chaos." At that very moment, somewhere in the Confederation, a Yeath was attempting their first headspin. An Arxian was optimizing their crystals with decidedly non-spiritual algorithms, and a Zaxrith was trying to figure out how to shorten their traditional greeting from 6 hours to a more reasonable 5 minutes. The galaxy would never be the same. And humanity? Humanity was just getting started. 1 year into what historians would later call the Great Disruption, Captain Thompson found herself addressing a rather unusual gathering. The Confederation had organized its first-ever Innovation Through Chaos Symposium, and the scene before her was something she never thought she'd witness. "I still can't believe this is actually happening," she muttered to Reynolds, as they watched a Zaxrith demonstration team perform what they called a streamlined greeting ritual. They'd managed to get it down to 2 minutes and 15 seconds, primarily by turning most of the traditional tentacle gestures into a kind of synchronized interpretive dance. "Forget that," Reynolds whispered back. "Look at the Yeath delegation." Thompson turned and had to bite her lip to keep from laughing out loud. The Serpentine aliens had fully embraced their newfound love of breakdancing, but with an unexpected twist. They'd somehow combined it with their traditional trajectory calculations. The result was a bizarre but mesmerizing display of serpentine bodies spinning and weaving through the air, leaving trails of holographic equations in their wake. "Their accuracy has improved by 40%, Lieutenant Commander Drake reported, appearing beside them with a tablet full of data. Turns out all those years of interpretive dance gave them an incredible sense of spatial awareness. Once they added some human street moves to their repertoire." She shrugged. "Well, let's just say our navigation teams are having to step up their game." Speaking of stepping up games, Reynolds nodded toward another corner of the vast conference hall. "The Arxians have gone full tech punk." Sure enough, the crystalline beings had set up a display that would have looked more at home in a human cyberpunk novel than a Confederation gathering. Their traditionally pristine crystal computing cores were now housed in what could only be described as artistically industrial casings, complete with exposed cooling systems that pulsed with rhythmic lights. "They're calling it spiritual harmony through controlled chaos," Drake explained. "Apparently, they've discovered that their crystals actually process data more efficiently when they're not trying to maintain perfect geometric alignment. Something about quantum fluctuations being enhanced by controlled irregularities. In other words," Thompson translated, "they've learned that sometimes you need to mess things up to make them work better." "Exactly. Though I have to say, their aesthetic choices are interesting," says the woman who started the trend of painting circuit diagrams as abstract art in engineering spaces, Reynolds pointed out. Drake grinned unrepentantly. Hey, those paintings improved crew efficiency by 15%. Turns out having something interesting to look at while doing maintenance makes people pay more attention to the systems they're working on. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the center of the hall. A group of Confederation officials was gathering around what appeared to be a holographic presentation, their expressions ranging from fascination to mild horror. "Oh, good," Drake said brightly. "The Kethri have finished their project." "Do I want to know?" Thompson asked. "Remember how they used to insist that all diplomatic communications had to be encoded in traditional poetry forms?" "Don't tell me." "They've created an AI that combines human meme culture with their traditional poetic structures. They're calling it the Memetic Enhancement for Meaningful Expression System." "MEMES?" Reynolds groaned. "Really?" "It gets better," Drake continued cheerfully. "Watch what happens when they input a standard diplomatic request." They watched as one of the Kethri officials entered a formal request for trade route adjustment. The AI processed it for a moment, then displayed its output, a perfectly structured traditional poem that somehow incorporated both ancient Kethri literary conventions and what appeared to be a reference to human cat videos. "The efficiency rating on diplomatic communications has increased by 200%, Drake reported. "Turns out comedy makes people pay attention to bureaucratic documents. Who knew?" "We've created monsters," Thompson said, but she couldn't keep the pride out of her voice. "Beautiful, chaos-embracing monsters." "Oh, speaking of chaos," Reynolds checked his tablet. "You might want to prepare yourself for the next presentation. The Zaxrith and Yith have collaborated on something they're calling quantum breakdance diplomacy." Thompson blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "They've combined the Zaxrith's new streamlined greeting rituals with the Yith's breakdance-enhanced trajectory calculations to create a new form of diplomatic negotiation that simultaneously establishes trade routes and treaty terms through coordinated dance battles." There was a moment of silence as they processed this. "Please tell me someone is recording all of this," Thompson said finally. "The Arxians have their new crystal punk camera arrays running 24/7, Drake assured her. "They're compiling something they're calling When Humans Happen to Us, a documentary series." "That's not ominous at all." "Oh, it gets better," Reynolds added. "They've hired human editors to enhance the narrative structure through strategic application of what humans call meme logic." Thompson buried her face in her hands. "We've unleashed meme culture on an unsuspecting galaxy. There's no coming back from this, is there?" "Nope," Drake said cheerfully. "But look on the bright side. Diplomatic efficiency is at an all-time high. Technological innovation is through the roof. And next week the Confederation is hosting its first-ever intergalactic dance-off/trade negotiation summit." "The galaxy will never be the same," Reynolds mused. "That was kind of the point, wasn't it?" Thompson watched as a group of Yith began teaching some Arxian youngsters how to do the worm, which, given their crystalline nature, produced some rather spectacular light shows. "We didn't just want them to accept our methods. We wanted them to find their own way to embrace chaos and efficiency." "Mission accomplished, then?" "Oh, I think we're just getting to the good part." Thompson grinned as she watched a Zaxrith attempting to demonstrate a moonwalk with their tentacles. "After all, if this is what they've come up with in just 1 year." "The galaxy isn't ready for year 2, is it?" Drake asked. "The galaxy wasn't ready for year 1, Thompson replied. "That's what made it so much fun." Later that evening, she added a third plaque to her wall. "First rule of galactic innovation: if you can't beat the humans, join them. Second rule: once you join them, out-weird them." And below that, in text that somehow managed to incorporate both ancient Kethri calligraphy and Comic Sans: "The galaxy may never recover, but at least it's having fun trying. The end."